Recording, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we will call the February 3rd, 2022 Corcoran Planning Commission to order, and we'll do roll call. Commissioner Drummond?
Here.
Commissioner Lanterman?
Here.
Commissioner Scholak?
Here.
And Commissioner Vanden Einde.
Here.
Okay, and Commissioner Jacobs here, so everybody is in attendance. Okay, Pledge of Allegiance, for those who would like, please join us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome to our single guest in the crowd tonight, and those of you online, and welcome Councilor Variance and Mayor Keefe for joining us tonight. Thank you very much. And of course, our diligent staff. Item number 3, we'll move on to the approval of tonight's agenda. Does anybody want to make a motion, or does anybody have any questions or changes?
I do have one suggestion, and that is that the liaison calendar differs from the planned agenda from the minutes from last week's meeting, or last month's meeting. So maybe we can cover that when we get to item 9.
It does it that, doesn't it? Quite a bit. Yeah, something,
You can correct that, yeah.
okay. Very good, nice call. Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Okay, I have a motion to approve the minutes, or the agenda.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor of approving tonight's agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Okay, tonight's open forum. For those in the audience or online, the open forum is your chance to bring up any issue that you'd like to talk about to the Planning Commission that is not already on our agenda for tonight. So I don't believe you wish to speak. So if there's anybody online, Planner Natalie will give you instructions on how to be recognized.
Members of the public joining us via Zoom, if you would like to speak at the open forum here, please use the Reactions tab. There should be the raise your hand function accessible either under the Reactions or the Participants tab. And at this time, no one's raising their hands, Mr. Chair.
Do we have anybody online?
We have a couple people online, but it's a diehard fan, I like to call her, and then Counselor Nichols at this point.
Okay, very good. All right, we'll move on to item 5, minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes. First one is from our January 6th special working session. Is there any comments, questions, or corrections? Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from January 6th. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Mr. Chair, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. I think perhaps your microphones are too close. There you go.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, I was noticing the same thing. Okay, we'll move on then to item 5B, which is the January 6th, 2022 regular meeting minutes for the Planning Commission. Did anybody have any questions or comments And I think the only thing then, via Commissioner Scholak's comment is maybe those dates and names for the future city council liaison might be incorrect.
I can take a note to look and confirm that that is what was on the last agenda. We can, maybe we could look that up right now.
Because you just had it, you just went on the 27th?
Yes.
So you must have known you were going, so this must be wrong in the minutes, but probably.
I think so. Yeah, I
So
mean, it must
so it
be.
would appear the minutes are wrong?
The minutes are wrong and the agenda is correct.
Okay,
Okay.
so I can correct that. I can make a note to correct that.
Okay, any other corrections, comments? All right, hearing none. I have a motion to approve.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes from January 6th, say aye.
I
Opposed? All right, those minutes are so approved. Thank you. Okay, into our new business. And there is a public comment opportunity. You want to take those comments now? If there's anybody that wants to talk about item 6A or 6B?
Sure. So, again, members of the public, if you would like to address the commission on any of our new business items tonight, please utilize the raise your hand function under the reactions menu or participants tab.
And for those that don't have an agenda, item 6A is for the final plat unit development for Bellwether's 7th edition. And item 6B under new business is the landscape variance for St. Terese.
At this time, Mr. Chair, no one's raising their hands quite yet.
Okay. With that, why don't we go on then to the staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the final plat and final PUD application for Bellwether 7th edition. The Planning Commission only reviews the PUD. The project is the Schober property just south of Stieg Road. It was platted as a single lot as part of the initial project with the idea that the homeowners would stay for a longer period of time than the plat itself. They have now decided to move and sell the property to Pulte, and so this becomes, again, the land was always part of the subdivision, but earlier this year, or I guess it was last year, they came in for a preliminary plat to show how this lot that's part of Bellwether could get subdivided into 17 parcels. So that preliminary plat with the subdivision was part of the Amberley Bellwether project that was approved in July. And the final approvals for the Amberley and Bellwether addition on the former Van Blaricon property were approved in October. So this is the site plan for Bellwether 7th edition. Again, on the north is Stieg Road. It fills in a kind of a single-family home that sits in the middle of the Bellwether project today. It's 17 homes on 3.74 acres. And again, this is consistent with the original Bellwether approvals. It was always included in the land for the Bellwether project. So on the screen, you can see up kind of where it says between sheet 4 and sheet 3. This was the 2018 preliminary plat. And it showed how that road connection would occur at some future date, but didn't subdivide the property into the 17 lots we see today. Then in 2021, when the plat was approved, it showed the 17 lots, and you can see on the south side of the new road where the existing home sits today that will be removed as part of this project. And the pond that exists in the second edition will be expanded as part of this project on the north side of the lots adjacent to Steep Road. The street connection that is stubbed on either side of this project on 102nd, and I forget the other street, will connect with this project. So that was the preliminary plat that was approved last year. This is the final plat. You can see it is consistent. And this is the phasing plan, just for reference. On the upper right, that green box is Bellwether 7th that we're talking about tonight. So we do ask that you move to recommend approval of the resolution approving the final planned unit development plan, as it is consistent with the preliminary PUD approvals. Chad from Pulte is here tonight representing the developer if you have questions. Otherwise, Mr. Chair, again, we recommend approval.
Very good, thank you. Now, I know that Commissioner Lanterman in the past has commented on this process of we must approve or this and that, being that we are just reviewing this, but we don't give a recommendation to the city council on it, correct?
You do give your recommendation when you move to recommend approval of the PUD final development plan resolution in your packet.
Okay. And if we want to recommend changes, though, that's probably not going to happen.
Well,
Not that I have any, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to,
at this point, we're just reviewing to make sure it's consistent with the original or the preliminary plan approvals, and staff finds, there are some conditions in here, there are some, what we would consider minor changes or things that need to be identified in the field with engineering staff, such as, field locating the final street lamp locations. But generally, no, we would not be changing the project at final PUD plan.
okay, very good, thank you. All right, Commission, any discussion or questions? Commissioner Lanterman?
Thank you. And along the chair's question there, so my understanding is this commission has to approve, must approve if this request is in conformance with the preliminary approval, correct?
Correct.
So it would be unlawful for us to not recommend this to city council, correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't, yes, it is, if it is consistent, you should recommend approval.
Well,
I'm not going to go so far as to say unlawful, but it is your.
But it is unlawful, because that would be a violation of our city code, correct? So we really have no discretion
Correct,
because of the use of the PUD and its prior approval.
correct.
Okay. I just have one question on this item. Just procedurally, and I just haven't had time to review this, I'd like to understand why the Planning Commission reviews final PUDs, but the final plats are reviewed only by the city council.
Sure. Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
So Minnesota statute says that final plats are reviewed by council only, and that's why council only reviews that. The statutes are silent on the PUD process, other than to say there is a PUD process, and so the city has discretion in how they establish that process in the code, which is established in our zoning ordinance. And that is Corcoran's process. It is not typical for that to come back to the Planning Commission, but when this ordinance was drafted, this city council wanted the Planning Commission to review the final PUD plan.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I don't oppose that, I want you to understand, but obviously, when it came to review and the specifics of everything, it didn't go into great detail because it looked like it conformed with the preliminary PUD plat, of which we did hold a legal required public hearing on at the first time. So we've already had our opportunity to voice changes and
Yes.
things like that. So I'm comfortable with this, I just wanted to make that clear. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? Let me, on page 3, the diagram of the staff report. Now, I understand our, the code as it applies to having upgraded architectural elevations facing the street, in this case, Stieg Road. But I'm kind of questioning, at some point, when these lots no longer back up to Stieg Road, why did we require it then for, let's see, the 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll generously give it the 5 lots on the upper end by that water thing, if they don't actually back up to the road? Is it because they're just visible?
It's because they're visible from the road. But with that said, I did not put this slide in here, and I told Chad I wasn't putting the slide in there. The graphic that we created with this packet does not match the graphic that actually went in the preliminary plat approvals. Lots 8, 9, and 10, the city council and staff planning commission, as we reviewed this originally, those 3 do not, that back up to the pond, as you said, are separated. We did not require the double frontage on those 3 lots. So that graphic will get, that's in the staff report, will get updated before the council meeting.
Okay, but then if you look at lot 11, are they going to require 3 sides?
Those require 2 sides because it has 2 fronts.
Okay, but you can see the backside of 11 from Stieg Road just as easily as you could see 10.
10 is not subject to that, and 11 is going to be blocked by the
Oh,
homes in the section.
okay, so this is saying that, okay, so 8, 9, 10, 8, 9, and 10 do not have to have upgraded elevations on the backside.
Correct,
Okay, it's just, okay, that's why I was questioning them.
yes.
So they have to
I
have,
thought I could get through this, Mr. Chair, without you bringing up my mistake, but Nicholas put this together and did not use the one from the preliminary approval, so those 3 are exempted.
okay,
And I will correct that when it goes to the council. I apologize for the confusion.
no problem. Okay, that's the only question I have. Anybody else? Okay. All right, well, I've read through the resolution. I didn't see anything, well, let me just double check. Did I have?
So, Mr. Chair, 12C, to your question, will change to say lots, which lot is it? The lots will change in 12C, which is referring to the lots that back up to Steve.
Okay. I did have one question in the final resolution, and this is just so on item 9 of the resolution, parking shall be permitted on one side, okay, that's pretty common, and shall be signed in accordance with city standards. In this particular situation, are there any time limitations for parking on the street? I mean, is it, in most of our city streets, isn't parking in the street prohibited overnight?
During winter months, it would be, Mr. Chair, so I believe November 1st to April 1st.
So not in the summer?
Correct.
So how does that pertain to like trailers? And I'm only saying this because, again, we're talking about a pretty high dense, development here. So what if somebody's got, grandma and grandpa over and they go and park a 40-foot, trailer on the street for 5 days? Is that permitted?
Mr. Chair, I think it's gray area, but I would defer to the police department on that, how they would enforce that. I think parking, as long as it's movable, but if it doesn't have a vehicle attached to it, I'm not sure how that would classified. I don't know if that would be a vehicle anymore. So I would have to defer to police department on that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not that there's anything you would do to a sign, you know, although I know that sometimes no parking signs have clear, no parking, you know, between the hours of, you know, 10 PM and 6 AM or something to that effect. I take it these signs will not have any time limitations or restrictions.
No, I don't believe they do, Mr. Chair, but this is a homeowners association. And my experience so far with this association is those neighbors are very diligent about what happens in that neighborhood. So I suspect they would self-police that
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Okay. All right, that was the only other question I had. All right. Anybody else? Okay, all right, since the only correction or change in that would be to restate item 12C, A and B, or just B?
It's just B.
Okay. Any other changes or?
I do have a question. I'm just,
Sure.
because I wasn't here when all this went through. I'm just curious, because I'm still learning. But on page 5 of the parks, trails, and open space, where it says city should accept park dedication in the form of land, and then the one is, in the middle is 4.4 acres of land for proposed amenity center, which is private. I was just curious, like, is that something we normally would? It's like, yeah, you're dedicating it, but it's actually just for you?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, our code in the park dedication ordinance, which is part of the subdivision ordinance, allows the city to give some credit for private amenities. I think it's, private amenities can satisfy up to 20% of your park dedication requirement. And really, the Parks Commission, I know at the time when this came through in 2018, did struggle with this, but ultimately felt, and I don't know if you've been to this amenity center, but it's pretty plush. It's pretty nice. It's got a lot of facilities. They've got pickleball and I think they've got a pool. I can't remember. Yeah.
Indoor pool?
Yeah, it's pretty extensive and provides a lot of recreational needs for those residents, and so the commission did provide credit for that. It's not typical by any means. This is the only neighborhood. I do not believe we gave credit for the private amenity center in Ravinia, although I could be wrong, but I don't believe that we did back in 2014. So it is unusual, but our code does allow it specifically. Thank you.
And it is private, it's not open to the public.
Correct.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the resolution or to recommend approval of the resolution?
Mr. Chair, since we have no other choice, I will make a motion to approve.
Okay, is there a second?
Second, Shulak.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Your recommended approval. Okay. All right, let's move on to item 6B, landscape variance for St. Terese. And our staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a landscape variance for the St. Terese communities. On the screen is the location. You can see the City Hall property in the center of this property on the west side. The St. Terese project is directly south of us here at City Hall. It's a mixed-use senior living community with 206 units in a continuum of care and some accessory uses on about 13 acres that the St. Terese Communities is buying from the city of Corcoran. The preliminary approvals were granted in November of last year, and for those of you that were on the commission may recall a significant discussion about landscaping. The landscape plan showed 181 trees where 259 were required. And as we'll talk about, because of the nature of the site in this urban area, it was very difficult to provide the minimum landscape requirements. And so as a condition of the preliminary approvals, we included a condition that said they either need to comply with the landscape ordinance or come back with a variance. And so they've come back with a landscape variance request. This is the preliminary plat that was approved on the grading plan, so I apologize, it's a little hard to read, but the St. Terese site, there's a new road coming in south of City Hall about where this southern access is today, and will wrap around the St. Terese site. So this is the property that they're buying. In the middle, there's that starfish sort of building. It's a building with several wings that will be developed, and in the southwest corner, you can see there's a future building planned, and in the north, there's a community garden and future expansion area. So the landscape plan really provides intense landscaping around the perimeter of the development site, but preserves those two future development areas. They could provide the minimum landscaping if they planted the trees in those areas, but as we discussed in the staff report, providing them there as a temporary solution, and as sensitive as we are to tree removal, it feels counterintuitive to plant landscaping just for the sake of meeting the requirement and then remove them later. So we outlined in the staff report what the variance standards are. The variance, as you recall from last month, is one of the items where we have the highest level of discretion. It's different in that the burden of proof is on the applicant to show compliance with the 5 variance standards. The first 3 are really the 3-pronged test of a variance, and then the second 2 are also in the statutes, that they need to be in harmony with the ordinance and the comprehensive plan. Staff's review of this, as outlined in the staff report, is that the variance standards have been met. There is a practical difficulty in physically fitting the trees on the site and complying with all of our other ordinance requirements for the town center, which is our dense urban development. They do provide a mix of features that use up land, for example, for the amphitheater, which makes it unavailable for landscaping. And preserving vacant areas for future development rather than planting them temporarily does seem to be consistent with our zoning ordinance intent and our comprehensive plan. However, if the Planning Commission finds that the standards have not been met, they should recommend denial, and the applicant would then temporarily plant trees in those future expansion areas to meet the code requirements.
I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, I don't either. What is happening?
What, maybe undo?
Did I okay. I lost control. Hold on.
Oh,
What?
Sure. Open it.
Or did Zoom freeze? No.
No, it's on my, I'm zipping through it here.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Well, my next slide will say, and I'll just say, we find the standards have been met, and we do recommend approval of the variance as proposed based on the findings that the standards have been met. The applicant is here in the audience tonight, I believe with his landscape architect. And so if you do have questions, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer those questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I broke it entirely.
Great, thank you. Okay, commission discussion and recommendation. Is anybody, Mark,
thank you.
please?
No chance on getting that slide back up?
Well, there's a chance.
Oh, I can read it. I have good notes, but, so I am a little confused by this. In the opening paragraph, it states, and I quote, the landscape plans provided 181 trees, 159 overstory and 66 understory, where 259 trees are required. Do I have that correct?
Yeah. That's the way it looks.
So 159 plus 66 is 225. So can someone please clarify for me where the 181 number is coming from? Are there 34 fewer trees being requested, or is it actually 78 fewer trees being requested?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, yes, I will add that to the staff report. The ordinance says that understory trees can be used to meet the overstory tree requirement on a 3-to-1 basis. So 66 understory trees equals 22 overstory trees. So it's 159 plus 22.
Okay, thank you. My second point here, and, there is discretion in whether or not we grant this variance. Now, my understanding is St. Terese is basically saying, look, we can comply, but if we do, 34 of the trees are going to be put into an undeveloped part of the property where they will just get moved later, right? I think you mentioned that. Now, under the variance standard, there has to be a hardship that is not created by the landowner. Now, it seems to me like there could be an argument made here that the hardship was created by St. Terese because St. Terese chose to have a building with a bigger footprint and thus less space to plant trees in the developed areas on the plot. So could someone explain how this is a condition that is not created by the landowner? And I'm wondering, is the argument here just, well, you know what, this is in the downtown center, so, we can do it this way?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, certainly, I mean, that's the applicant's argument. They're here and they can speak to that. We think that the nature of the downtown district with the build-to lines as opposed to the setback lines and the desire to maximize the development on these parcels, we think is a practical difficulty.
How is that not a practical difficulty created by the landowner?
Well, I think the argument could be made either way. One could find that the standards in the downtown mixed-use district with the build-to line requiring the buildings up by the street result in the loss of green space that could otherwise be used for landscaping. But certainly the commission could also find that the design of the project by St. Terese created the hardship.
Yeah, and what's your position?
I think our position is that the ordinance, the landscape ordinance does not account for the design standards in the downtown mixed-use district with the build-to line and the desire for maximizing building coverage.
Okay, all right, thank you.
May I ask, the outlot A, that is the portion that runs between kind of what's going to be the trail, and I know we've talked about like the speed limit's gonna slow down there, we want it to be like walkable. Is there a reason why that, is the outlot not getting any landscaping?
The outlot is ours.
Okay,
That's the lineal park that the city's retaining.
okay,
And ultimately, so we're not selling that.
Yep.
We're only purchasing
gotcha.
lot.
That is
lot one.
helpful. Okay, and then is there a date at which those future developments have already been talked about being built? Or is it like, it's helpful for me to understand, like, are we talking that 50 years from now, we could build something, and so for 50 years, people could enjoy trees on those outlots while they're, taking all of the benefits that trees go. I won't geek out on trees, but is it like it's going to be within, like we have a determined amount of time that we're planning that is then built upon? And that is probably a question best aimed for you guys, yeah, if you don't mind.
Commissioners, Calvin Chongowski, CFO for St. Terese. We do not have a specific date, just as a short answer to your question. But we do, and we have had similar developments like this in the past where we have future expansion capabilities, at least I can use, for example, our campus in Brooklyn Park. We acquired that property, opened in 2006, and then our expansion occurred in 2012. We did something similar in Woodbury just recently with our Phase 1 campus acquired the property in 2014, and then Phase 2 was developed in 2017. So that's what I can offer. We don't have a specific date.
Doesn't sound like 50 years, though.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you, I appreciate that. Because that was a question I had as well, because it does definitely seem like, I'm wrestling with the fact that there was not personal input of mine necessarily into this vision plan for the urban development. And I understand that urban development is typically more dense, but I also feel like that perhaps that's the reason we're experiencing some of the issues that we're experiencing is because of the density of building versus the balance of nature. And so I'm really wrestling with whether this qualifies as a hardship versus, I think, right. So if anyone has other questions, I have more, but I'm going to take a minute to formulate them. But if you have any questions you want to jump in and discuss.
Okay, thank you. So, this is just for those that haven't, the city council recently set their 2022 goals. And we are going to be busy through some of those goals because there's a lot of zoning ordinance work. And this was mentioned when we had the public hearing on this, and staff is correct. There was a lot of discussion about these trees, and I think so that is on the agenda for 2022 is to hash out some of this specifically related to our landscape. But I do recall specifically the idea that we could substitute, in exchange for a bigger tree, some of these smaller trees. So as I look at their plant schedule, your evergreens are 6 feet, your ornamentals are 1.5 inch, ball and burlap. Your deciduous overstory trees are 2.5 inch ball and burlap. You got 5 gallon, some 3 gallon.
How can you read that?
And I went to my eye doctor recently. And then, of course, you got the perennials. I guess I still think that would have been a good alternative for this particular project and maybe others in the future. But it is not part of our code. And so, the only thing I can say at this point is, given that this was something that was discussed, I guess I'm a little disappointed by the fact that the applicant didn't kind of read into that and maybe go that route and try to work something out with staff. Because this is a big facility. It covers a lot of area. And nothing can be more beneficial in this situation than to have bigger trees now. Two, I want to comment on Commissioner Landerman's point when we talk about the hardship. I understand the argument that the applicant's making about the build to, and staff has pointed out the build to line, and this is our downtown density. But when they designed this and laid it out and still left those open lots, I don't find that they have a hardship anymore. You have land. Now, if planting trees out there for something, yeah, or to not plant trees out there for something that may not happen in the future. I mean, you take that north lot, you know, that's gonna be, you know, what, a garden. You know, certainly, there's enough room up there for planting some trees. But given some of the elevations there, I can understand that the garden might be somewhat limited too. So I'm going to vote to recommend denial of the variance. And let it go to the city council. And hopefully, maybe in between, there can be some compromise with staff. Maybe the city council will pass it as is. But they know, you know, they kind of know what we're thinking. I think they're thinking the same thing. And if this helps move that along further, both on our side and the city council, I think that would be beneficial. But I don't think that the burden of proof has been met when you've got that much land. And if you got to plant extra trees in there, I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. But I gladly would have approved it had they said, well, we'll take, you know, we'll just throw it a random 25%, and we spaded them in. You know, we put in bigger trees in certain locations, maybe especially along 116. Maybe some out here along this future, whatever road this is going on the east side. And then maybe even within the campus itself. But that's where I'm going to go. Now, I do have some questions, and this kind of goes again along with Commissioner Landerman. Under the variance, consistency with ordinance standards, I also had a math, but I didn't pick it up on page 1 in the second paragraph. I picked it up in the variance first paragraph under B, because I was like, well, the applicant is requesting a variance from the requirement to provide 34 additional trees. And in my math, in that paragraph comes out to 78, which is, of course, it is stated the only apparent space is to plant the additional 78 trees. Where does the 34 come from?
Where are you reading? I'm sorry, I'm not following you. Where?
Under 4, on page 2 of the analysis, there's A and B. Under B, the very first paragraph, under variance, the applicant is requesting a variance from the minimum 259. Landscape plans submitted with the variance show 181. The applicant is requesting a variance from the requirement to provide 34 additional trees.
Well, Nicholas must have had a little got off on his typing. It's the next paragraph where it says 78 is correct. I apologize.
And I did see that, so I just was wondering, where does this 34?
Thank you. I'll get
Okay.
that corrected. That is 78.
Okay.
Sorry for the.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
It's, I guess my other question, as I formulate my thoughts related to the future development, is that do any of these numbers of trees in here required relate to the future development? So right now, they're based on the residential homes that are being built this first pass, or this first phase, right? So we're sort of also kind of saying, if we don't have room now, we won't have room regardless of how many additional residential homes we add in the future. I mean, that would be, is that a fair assumption? I guess would be my question.
Yes, because if we do not change the code, we will have the same issue when the next phase comes in.
But a next phase would require additional trees, because now you
Under
got
the current.
additional residential units, which is how this is based, how this is calculated.
Yeah, if I may, I was curious about that. Kind of the assumption in the staff report was that if the trees were put there on these empty spaces, then they must be removed in the future. seems like an interesting, it seems like an assumption that
They
isn't
don't,
necessarily
they don't
valid.
have to be removed, it's just if they're gonna put a building up on it.
Then they would have to make a request
they-
to, right, I mean, because then if they were in compliance by adding trees, then to remove those trees would require some additional approvals, right? I mean, they can't just remove them, it's like, well, then they'll just take them out later, like, maybe, I mean, they might take them out later if it's approved, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, our goal as the city, when we adopted the Southeast District, is to maximize development, not have giant 4-acre vacant land.
Yeah.
So you're right, it is an assumption, but there is a process they'll have to go through, and they'll have to ask the same, again, if the code doesn't change, another variance to the number of trees, and as part of that, asked to remove trees that were required as part of Phase 1 in order to do Phase 2.
Right, okay.
Yes, that's accurate.
May I also ask another question?
Yes.
So I understand that the design of the street, that is the portion that we're sharing right now, just coming up with the design of what that will look like, the city and St. Therese. It is not code, so I guess I'm not sure if I'm just spewing an idea, but is there an opportunity for some of the 78 trees to then be the street tree line that was supposed to be the city's responsibility in the future? Are you following? Everyone is just looking at me. I'm trying to think of a way to find middle ground. And I understand that you have thrown out a few suggestions as possibilities to kind of come towards each other. And I guess maybe if nothing else, that I'm just doing the same thing. So I don't expect a response.
Well, I have a response.
Oh, okay.
Because we can only work with what the code actually says today.
Sure.
While I appreciate the idea of giving credit for a larger tree, we don't have that tool in our toolbox today. We don't have a tool to allow you to plant trees off-site in the public right-of-way or on City Hall property. That is not something our code allows us to do. There are cities that say, especially urban cities that know you're not going to be able to meet the landscaping requirement, that will say you can pay us cash and we'll go use it to plant in our parks, or you can go plant in our parks. We don't have that tool.
Okay.
What I can tell you is that we do have City Center Drive planned as a boulevard. So their landscape plan is showing landscaping in our
Yep.
public right-of-way. They don't get credit for that. They're going to pay for that as part of their portion of the road, but they don't get credit for that. There's a planted median. They don't get credit for those trees either.
Okay.
So it's very much, when you look at the plan, I think you can see there's a lot of landscaping both on the site and adjacent, but we don't have a tool to give credit for that. Certainly it's something you can think about when you consider a variance, but there's no tool that we have as staff to be able to say, well, if you came in with bigger trees, then we could let you do it. I can't do that.
Sure.
But they could have gone down that road
Made
as,
that part of their
as
variance.
part of,
Yes.
you know, some kind of conciliation and when asking for a variance, and I'm, you know, I guess I'm surprised that they didn't. But I know at our meeting, we talked about those trees on the boulevard.
Yep.
And we talked about, well, you know, can't we just put some of those trees into reserve but that, again, is another thing. So, I mean, the city council has a lot of authority to do this, but as the variance is put to us today, there really isn't anything that says to me that, you know, what is required can't be done as it is for that site today. But I gladly would have supported anything that might have gone towards, you know, well, we'll plant as fewer trees, but we'll make some of them bigger. But that didn't happen. So at this point, that's, you know, that's where I'm going to stand, so. Anybody else? And again, being that this is going to be something that we're going to review in the future, we'll all have another opportunity to chime in on this and try to create some more options for developers when it comes to landscaping.
I mean, just as, being that one of the newer people, or, no, I guess the newest person, I'm thinking this down to, I mean, I came from Plymouth, and I lived in Plymouth, and you know, kind of that Maple Grove area were kind of areas I spent a lot of time, and I think about their
downtown areas. And yeah, at some point, if it's too spread out, then nobody wants to come to that environment because it's everything's spread out. The areas I enjoy the most are where I can actually go from place to place to place. And if you're going to have large areas of trees and open spaces, because we have, it might look beautiful, but it's not overly practical for, for certain, for those types of activities. Is that the intent of our downtown areas, to be a bit more like dense, urban, so that it's more intended to be shops along the way, and maybe this thing on the corner would be eventually part of that, versus like it's a bunch of trees that would look beautiful and add obviously value with trees, but I just, if the intent is to drive people to come to it and want to hang out and go to an amphitheater and so forth.
If I may suggest, on the website, there is a downtown, southeast district
Okay.
plan.
I'll take
You might
a look
want
at
to
it.
maybe just.
I think I should look at it. yes.
And that'll give you a layout of what our vision is.
Okay.
What the streetscapes look like,
Oh.
what kind of pedestrian amenities there are, and things like that,
Okay.
so. Yes, sir.
Chair, if I may, I could just give a little bit of some background of just all the planning efforts on the site. If you look back a few years when we had proposed a site plan, perhaps that site plan could have accommodated this requirement. Demonstrated through the changes that we made, we've actually pulled the building, part of our campus, all the way south, really in the spirit of adhering to the intentions of the plans for the Southeast District. And those plans really call for density and bringing a lot of the building to a maximum setback. So we shifted our entire building footprint and we pulled it all the way south, really to promote the walkability throughout the whole downtown, not just the town center, but the downtown core. When we did that, we freed up and created larger spaces of land, which really suits for the preservation of future development, which again is the intention of the downtown core. So a lot of our actions and intentions and where we have moved our site have not been at our desire. It's been really to meet the intent of the downtown district guidelines.
Yeah, and I don't, I think that's great, and I can understand why you did that. And again, this is no, I think this is a problem that our code has created, not a problem that you guys created. And something that, again, will have to be addressed regarding specifically maybe that downtown area as to what our landscape requirements are going to be, because, with a build to requirement, I mean, there's hardly room for any real big trees at all. So, this is going to be a problem that we're all going to have to give careful consideration to, going forward. And I have no doubt that the city council will make the right decision for you. So I'm not overly concerned about it, but it is, this is what we're all given right now, and we're seeing some of the things we need to fix.
And I do just want to say I appreciate all of your time and consideration, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have. It really is where we feel, we're trying to demonstrate that there is a hardship that is created really at no fault of St. Terese. That's the applicant.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Since you mentioned it, I have a question then. Okay, so you said, now, if I could ask for clarification from staff, under the variance standard, there has to be a hardship that is not created by the landowner. Would you agree?
Well,
Am
I
I
would just
correct in that?
clarify, it's a practical difficulty in the ordinance. Hardship is an old standard, practical difficulty is slightly different. But the practical difficulty has to exist, one, and two, it has to not be created by the landowner.
Right, so, but under the variance standard, as it's currently written, there has to be a hardship that is not created by the landowner, correct?
There has to be a practical difficulty.
The wording doesn't say hardship?
No,
That is not created by the landowner?
no.
Okay. So there has to be a practical difficulty not created by the landowner.
Yeah, there are actually two different standards. One, there has to be a practical difficulty in complying with the ordinance. Two, the conditions upon which the variance is, or variation is based is unique to the parcel of land and not created by the landowner.
Okay. My question for you is, St. Terese chose to have a building with a bigger footprint, meaning less space to plant trees in the developed areas on the plot. True or false?
I can't say that that is true, that we chose to have a bigger, we sized the campus appropriately to the market study that we had commissioned a few years back and then had updated.
Okay, but because of the size of the buildings, right, or because of the size of your campus, there is now less room to plant trees, correct? It's okay if you say true.
I can't, I don't know if I can. I'm trying to, I'm answering as honestly as I can.
Sure.
Because we, through several meetings with city and staff, we can't build a for example, we wouldn't bring forward a 6-story building to allow for a smaller footprint. I don't know if the city, I don't know if that would even be permitted. So I really feel in terms of the units that we have based off of the market need and demand and feasibility, that we would, I would say we minimize the footprint as much as we possibly can. We had, to give an example, we did have some of the nursing care areas, single story as a part of our initial concept. We consolidated those and built multi-story. So I would say that we've minimized the footprint as much as we possibly can.
In order to remain profitable.
In order to meet the southeast design standards
Correct.
as it's laid out. If you've read through there's a build too that's like, and you can correct me if I'm incorrect, but it's like 15 feet. So that's what he's saying when they had to bring everything south and east. It's because it had to be within 15 feet built to both of those roads, City Center Drive and the 79th Place. And then in those Southeast District design standards that were set out, it was multi-story buildings. So when they had desired to do some things as one story, in order to comply with those design standards of this urban downtown area, they consolidated and went with multi-story. Correct me if I'm speaking for you incorrectly.
That is correct. That is correct.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
I don't believe the Southeast District prohibits one-level buildings.
I don't think it prohibits. The terminology that it lays out is just that it encourages multi-story up to 4 stories for its design, its appearance. You correct me if I'm incorrect.
That is correct.
And so along that vein of thinking, and again, I'm wrestling, but along that vein of thinking, that would be the practical hardship not created by the landowner, would be this constraining document in which they're trying to meet. And I love trees, so I am not this is what I am, and I don't want like 4-acre empty lots in urban areas, but I feel like we can balance things so much better, but again, we have what we have that we have to work within. And I think that's, hopefully we'll get a chance to review some of that.
Commissioner Scholak, you got any questions or comments?
I would request that you bring us back a shrubbery.
Shrubbery.
Ever since that this project was brought to or planned or brought to our attention, I'm still scratching my head how this got approved, that a senior living complex like this was built just south of City Hall, where there's, granted, not constant activity, but a lot of activity. And the number of trees that you plant there are not going to muffle the sound of a police squad car siren. at all hours, any hours of the day. Having said that, it looks like the City Hall and this development will share a driveway, which going south will be called City Center Drive and will be the driveway going into City Hall. Going to the second map, there's a row of trees separating or between St. Terese and the City Hall. I would think that just from a privacy standpoint, that you would want to increase the amount of trees almost to the point where it's not possible to see City Hall, be distracted by City Hall. And I see that there's a sort of a baseball diamond-shaped area for the future development, which includes native seed. Is that going to be just native grasses, or is that going to be another building?
For future use, we were preserving that land for future development, which would be a building.
Okay.
Yes, that's the intent.
Do you know what type of building has been discussed for that?
We don't. It would be something that's very complementary to our community. So it could be a clinic. It would be something that would be, complementary to either senior living or healthcare space.
Mm-hmm.
It would be fair to say, though, that any future building on that vacant lot would be detached from your primary original structure as laid out, correct?
I would say so, yes. It's, to be able to attach those would be very difficult to interrupt that.
Because it looks like there's an elevation issue right on the north end of your parking as it's laid out, and it would have to go over, it would basically have to go over your parking lot if you were going to attach it. So it would most likely be a standalone structure, whereas the southwest vacant lot, even though it doesn't show it that way right now, but that would probably be attached.
Correct. The plan for Phase 2 on the southwest lot would attach to the Phase 1 building.
Yeah.
And if I recall from November, you indicated that would be additional independent living that would connect in 4 stories like the other two, like the H shape. And so that, I guess, just harks back to that, because it's really the residential homes. When I was reading through your hardship, it was indicating that really the healthcare dwellings should be treated differently than the residential dwellings when it relates to the ordinance. But if, that would be more residential homes.
That is
treated.
correct. There's, in our hardship, in one of the paragraphs, we mentioned that a healthcare dwelling is maybe sometimes a half or even a third of the size of a typical dwelling of a single-family dwelling, multifamily. So it creates, it drives pressure upwards on the required trees because of the unit, the units being part of that formula. So that does have part, that is part of it. We do feel that this will be a beautiful site. We've densely populated the trees. We certainly don't want to insulate our community. We want our community to be a part of downtown. We want people to get out and to walk and not feel like they're isolated. So we do, there is a balance there, most definitely with being able to plant between overstory and understory trees. And there has to be enough coverage and space and green space and area. So we really did bring our best design, not just best, but we feel that the highest densely populated area when it comes to trees, a mixture of overstory and understory trees.
And I do also notice on the second, second map here that along the City Center Drive, that there are plans for future city street trees to go on the St. Terese, which are those circles on the quarter circle there. So I would just not like the future development to come in and take out some of the trees that you just put in. And I understand that you want to include your community in the greater community at large, and that's a very good idea. But at the same time, your residents are going to be an older part of society who may or may not find noise to be a nuisance, noises of all kind. I know recently, for the last about 15 years, my mother was in assisted living, and she was a block away from the fire department. And we didn't learn about that until the day after we moved her in. And so she was interrupted at all hours from that. So I want to be, as much as I am in favor of the project and the mission that you have for this, I think you also have to be realistic about the demographic and the personalities of people who might want to move in there, who may not notice until the day after they move in that they're right next to the police station. So
Well, I suppose there is a calculated risk or a calculated probability that someday in the future, the police office will the police department will no longer be in this building. I think that's probably wished by more than a few people in the city, but I think your point is still well taken. I don't know what the procedures are for the police department to come and go out of there with their sirens going. I know that ambulances also stage out of there, but I don't live close enough to know what their practice is.
Right.
So I'm assuming that that's probably not going to be a significant problem for the residents, but it's still a point well worth making.
that's all I have.
Okay. Okay. Well, any other comments, questions, discussion? Anybody? I was going to ask, so this variance, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I was going to say, so why exactly didn't this variance need a public hearing? Because their public hearing was already included as part of,
Variances do not require public hearings.
okay, all right. Since we don't get a lot of variance requests anymore, not as much as we used to, I don't know why that is, but, or if we do, it's part of the public hearing right away. We don't get too many subsequent to.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody, you've read the resolution. Is there anything that anybody would like to recommend to the city council?
May I, pardon me, before we go that way, may I ask just one question of the landscape architect? My question is just, can you give us just an idea of the amount of space required for an overstory tree to grow well?
Sure. It depends on, and I work in a lot of cities, and so I've had this conversation a few times. Most overstory trees, and we're talking about oak trees, for instance, they're going to cover 1,000 to maybe 1,100 square feet, which is a big area at maturity. So we're talking maybe 20-some years down the line. And so that's what, say, Woodbury will use as a matrix. And they gauge trees from square footage size, and they have a whole list of trees that they consider to fall in that category and the category below and below. One of the things that I talked to Kendra about was that, and she mentioned this as well, which is Corcoran has kind of operated on a one-size-fits-all landscape ordinance for a long time. And that's worked out okay, but once you change density, a lot of things start to knock against each other. Hardcover allowability, floor area ratio, and amount of green space left. One thing you'll notice on this project that's going to be similar to all the others that you probably aren't used to seeing is there's no pond here. And that's because there's a regional pond being dug on the other side of the road that all these lots drain to. So that reduces the amount of land that St. Terese had to buy, which is great because then they can have a higher density. So when we're talking about 3 ornamental trees only equaling 1, I could tell you that a red maple and a Hawthorne have the exact same 680 square foot coverage. So now we're saying 3 Hawthorne trees is 3 times as much as 1 overstory tree, so it's not 100% equitable. There are times when an ornamental tree is 1/3 of the size of an overstory tree, but I can find matches where it's not. And so I look at the code in terms of how many physical trees are we planting. To Commissioner Jacobs' point about these tree sizes, and they're at the minimum for the city, since this is agricultural use, we wind up with a hard pan soil layer. It's very, very hard for bigger trees to punch through that. The smaller the tree, the faster it'll assimilate in that compact agricultural soil and rock it out of the ground. It's not necessarily about the cost, it's more about how soon do we get to that big oak size. And I can tell you right now that a smaller tree in this kind of greenfield setting will pass a bigger tree. It's just simple horticulture. They're going to get the care and love they need, they're going to get water, they're going to get tended to. And the other part of it too, with regards to hardship is, and this is something Kendra mentioned as well, which is the downtown district kind of just needs to re-examine what's fair and equitable, because if you say no to us, you're going to have to say no to everybody else that needs a variance because of the building to parking to lot size. And in our scenario, and we'll have to keep this brief, but we're not planting where we're not planting trees where the future addition's going. But if we cover the upper lot, it would cover 60% of that lot with the remaining trees. But the same tree sells that lot off, they just sold their trees to someone else. Now their lot's deficient. So if they break it off and plat it as another lot, now whoever's going to build there doesn't have enough room because of the floor area ratio and the parking that they need. Plus, whoever builds up there has to plant trees as well. So we kind of take this problem, we keep kicking it down the line. And so what you're getting here, and hopefully you'll agree, it's a lot of trees. We still need room to store snow. We still need room for people to walk their pet, and people like to see out. The ground floor residents are going to be looking at a lot of trees. But I think hopefully you'll agree that there's an awful lot of landscape here. And I crammed in trees as much as I could before I worry about trees killing each other off, fighting for nutrients, shading each other out. I mean, at the end of the day, I think everyone wants a mature landscape that's going to be around in 20 to 30 to 50 years. And if we go too far, we're going to start seeing trees thin and die, and then we're going to have holes. And generally speaking, people don't plant trees when they die, which is a pity, because I'm a big tree guy. So I would just encourage you to, consider the fact that, they're also giving you a nice chunk of money for park dedication, to plant trees on the streets, the lineal park. All those things are going to be beautiful. There's a lot of people interested in developing the Corcoran. I can tell you I've seen a fair number of proposals, so you folks are going to be busy. But that's just our insight as to why. The few holes that we've left on the site for that future addition, we need to plant those trees somewhere too. We need to leave a little bit of room for those trees. We'll also accommodate that snow removal and pet walking and people who just want to sit outside on a nice day. So hopefully that answers your question about tree size. But the good news for you is that there's lots of other cities that have examples of how they handle this and scale it. And so you can pick through their knowledge and as you look at how you want to rewrite the ordinance for this particular district and hopefully come up with some ideas that make it fair and equitable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm sorry, what was your name?
Sorry, my name is Ben Hartberg. I'm a landscape architect. I've got a firm in St. Paul.
Yeah, thank you. I found you to be very persuasive. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you.
Yes,
Mr. Chair,
Counselor,
may I
yes.
add, a lot of the questions you guys have had tonight are all of the questions I had last time this came in front of us. Our landscape architect said it best. I know Kendra said it initially when we were talking about this. We have to revisit that ordinance, along with a number of ordinances. The one size fits all comment makes me, this should have been done a long time ago. And I think with the evidence of what's coming out of the council and our work session coming up soon to talk about a lot of these things, I think it's gonna help us. What you guys have said tonight, it's one of those things, we've got an ordinance, we gotta follow it. Is it a hardship? Is it anything? It's been created by past things that have happened, and now's the time to make a change. And what do we do with this? You guys have thought it out very, very well. And then it comes to the council, we make things happen, and then we're the ones that gotta explain. But my issue, as your guys are discussing right now, we've got other applications that have been in that the I can't even say it, reforestation of some of our lands and properties that have come to us in the past are hardships, and people are having a hard time finding that. So the variance, I love Commissioner Lanterman's mindset and thoughts and stuff. I told him that when I sat next to him, and all of your guys' minds are something we've got to tap into as a council and as a city, and we all got to come up with something better for all of these different zones and districts. So, great conversation, you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Van Okay, any other discussion, questions, comments? All right, we have a variance in front of us. It's fairly straightforward and simple. Does anybody have any changes to that before we seek a vote on it?
Can I ask one more question?
You betcha.
Staff. Town center. Is that supposed to be more densely populated? Like, is there something in the code talking about the density of the center population?
10 to 12.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, the town center, just for the audience and for the new commissioners, is in the Southeast District, which is adopted as Appendix B of the zoning code. And the downtown core is a part of the town center, which was referenced earlier. This is in the town center, downtown mixed-use district, which has a density goal, I believe, of 20 to 30 units an acre. I'm going from memory, so I can confirm that later. I apologize. The new IT system doesn't allow me to keep my computer up and run both and check that, but it does have one of the highest densities, and the design guidelines themselves talk about the intensity of land uses and the mix of land uses. So I believe you all have received a copy of the zoning ordinance, and I will try to do a better job of highlighting those in the staff reports for this district going forward. But in fact, that was a long way to say yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll wait. Any other question or discussions? All right, we'll wait for Commissioner Schulak to return before we go forward. Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion to recommend approval of the variance?
Mr. Chair, I will make that motion to approve. I want to be pragmatic. I understand that based on the information I just received from staff that the town center, that the expectation is to have that area a little more densely populated. with that feedback from staff, I think that the request is reasonable, and I'll move to approve.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor of recommending approval of the variance, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Nay? All right, the variance recommendation is approved. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay. All righty, we shall move on then to item 7. Again, this is another public comment opportunity. Item 7 is Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, MS4 Ordinance Update. If there's anybody out in the audience that would like to address this issue before the commission, please raise your arm or your hand on the computer. Natalie will give you instructions.
Yes, our Zoom participants, raise your hand function is accessible on the reactions menu, sometimes on the participants tab. So feel free to hit that now if you'd like to address the commission on our MS4 ordinance update. And at this time, Mr. Chair, no one is raising their hand.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on then into the staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item is continued from a public hearing we held on January 6th regarding our MS4 ordinance update, and this item was tabled for further discussion. Just to repeat some of the background, the city's MS4, which stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Permit, does require the city to implement a regulatory mechanism to control land disturbance activities of at least 1 acre. And the city is expected to carry out updates to the city code as required by updates made to the permit by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, anticipated about every 5 years. The biggest change the city needs to make at this time to be in compliance is to update our city code to codify our existing practices, implementing a stormwater pollution prevention program. So these practices have been in place and evolved over the last decade. Staff is not proposing any changes to our current practices. And when evaluating the city's MS4 practices, the discretion is limited to our exemptions and the permitting process for land disturbances areas of under 1 acre in size. The rest of the proposed language is based on state requirements and does meet the minimum standards for the MS4 permit. At our last meeting, there was significant discussion about the proposed exemptions. And so we'll start with the under 50 cubic yards exemption. There was concern that this exemption, or the 50 cubic yards, would include vegetation, brush, and trees being removed. But looking at the wordage or verbiage in the exemption, it is specific to soil and earth, and Public Works confirmed that they do not include trees, brush, or vegetation in that threshold. There was also some concern that the 50 cubic yards was too little of a threshold, and so Public Works was nice enough to prepare some exhibits as to how much soil we are talking about. As you can see, 10 cubic yards is probably about as tall as my 12-year-old son. And then 50 cubic yards would be taller than myself, and I'm about 5'4". Next slide. This is a single dump truck, how much soil that would be contained in a single dump truck. It's a 4-foot-high pile, 20 feet long, and 18 feet wide. Next slide. And so basically 50 cubic yards is the equivalent of 4 solo dump trucks. 100 cubic yards is the equivalent of 8 solo dump trucks, and 300 cubic yards roughly is the equivalent of 12 side dump trucks. So that is a significant amount of soil to be disturbed at the current threshold that's listed in our code. But staff continues to recommend a threshold of 50 cubic yards for the exemption. This is based on a decade of experience dealing with land disturbance permits, complaints received by concerned neighbors, and seeing when issues with drainage tend to develop. Problems are more likely to occur when more than 50 cubic yards of earth and soil have been impacted, and a review of the project was not completed by staff beforehand. The threshold also further enables conversations and education to occur proactively, rather than the city needing to step in during an active project, causing time delays and additional costs. Most often, this does happen when there's impacts to drainage, easements, and wetlands. If the Planning Commission disagrees with staff's recommended threshold, the commission should make a specific recommendation as to the desired threshold for City Council to consider. Next slide. One change we did agree needed to be clarified is that private gardens should be included as an exempt activity. So we added to the agricultural exemption in Chapter 5406, Subdivision 2. It now reads tiling, planting, or harvesting of agricultural, horticultural, or silvicultural crops, other agricultural production operations, including private gardens. Next slide. The agricultural exemption, we believe, requires much larger discussion to occur both with the City Council and the farming community with Corcoran, as this exemption is based on established policy and values within the city. The public hearing held on January 6th did not propose or allude to this change, and therefore the agricultural community did not have a chance to provide comment on this departure from city practices and policies to date. There are additional places within our city code that offers agriculture exemptions from standards required of other uses. And so a recommendation to reevaluate agricultural exemptions can be forwarded to City Council, but we would recommend doing this outside of the MS4 permitting process. If City Council agrees with this policy change, then staff can complete a comprehensive review of our guiding documents to allow for consistency and application and practice. So at this time, staff recommends to make a motion to either recommend denial or approval of the draft ordinance and resolution. If the commission makes a motion to recommend approval, then the commission can further recommend specific verbiage changes to proposed Chapter 54. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Oh, I'm sorry, and Mike, our construction services coordinator, is here to answer additional questions on the process.
Okay, great, thank you. All right. Commission discussion recommendation. Mr. Lantman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you recall, I took issue with the fact that staff called the standards and exceptions consistent when it reduced the exemption from 301 down to 50 cubic yards. However, the staff report on this go-around clarifies that exception to the exception, 50 cubic yards, and that calculation does not include brush and trees. Am I reading this correctly?
Correct. Yes.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And you said that this is based on a decade of experience. Who has a decade of experience doing this?
Right
Is
here.
that based on you?
Sure, yes.
Because I was going to say, you guys look too young. You, I believe you have a decade of experience.
Take a shot.
Yeah.
Okay, I have nothing else, Mr. Chair.
Mike, let me ask you, do you, so in your experience with this, how many times do people actually apply for this permit for soil disturbance activities?
Mr. Chair, not as much as they should. We do find quite a few that we need to go in and step in and.
Okay,
kinda
so
solve
it
things.
would be fair to say that most people, they're just going to do it.
On the small,
regardless.
yeah, Mr. Chair, I think on the smaller projects, that's the case. On the agricultural stuff, there's some gray area there, which we always kind of struggle with on agricultural, where, what is agricultural? Some people like to believe they're agricultural when they're not, and we can find some issues there. But like, for instance, drain tiling a property, we have really no say in stopping that or permitting it.
Okay, understandable, but what about taking a backhoe into a dredge?
An existing ditch.
Well, a waterway that's going through fields that drain tiles flow into. My understanding from my dealing with mine is that there's a difference between a county ditch and natural ditches.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct. Yes.
Okay, so in natural ditches, there's not supposed to be any work at all. I've been told by the county, because I've had them out to my place, that taking backhoes to clear that. So not only are we moving more than 50 yards of material, but you're also affecting a waterway.
Potentially.
And I think the most, I think if I'm correct, I think the Shuddy property did it a couple of years ago, and the joke was, well, he came in and did it. It's do it and then ask questions or answer questions later after the fact. Because once it's done, it's done. You're not going to do anything about it. But you see that happen. Do you see any people taking permits out for that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, in recent years, more and more so, just because the rules have gotten tighter. Some of those agricultural exemptions, although ag is exempt from a lot of items, working within a wetland is not exempt no matter what you're doing. Now, there might be some leniency as far as an agricultural use, but we're seeing more permits because, quite frankly, people are looking for it more. The MPCA, the watershed, we are the LGU now, the local government unit, so we've been charged with that task of finding those, seeking those out, and enforcing it, so. Yeah, we're seeing more and more.
Okay.
And a lot of those are permitted through the DNR too, because if it's a DNR waterway.
Okay. So, just a point of clarification. So, removing trees from an agricultural field is no longer part of the soil disturbance application process. Because if we're not going to count brush, by volume as a removal, and that the soil disturbance only relates to disturbing soil or water drainage, so just by the pure act of taking chainsaws and logging equipment in and clearing out, 1 acre to 100 acres of wooded land is no longer part of it's exempt, if you will, from the application that's being discussed in this ordinance.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I believe that just removal of trees, vegetation, would remain exempt.
It would or wouldn't?
Would remain exempt. That would remain, though, I think that would fall under detailing, planting, harvesting, or agricultural, silvicultural. Give me one moment here.
Well,
Because the way agricultural goes to it is they're clearing trees to put fields into production.
Okay.
And that's kind of where they get that exemption.
Okay, and that would be under the exemption, routine agricultural crop management practices.
Correct.
Okay, now, as I've looked at the reality here, we have farmers, and then we have landowners. And so farmers are selling their land, and they may still rent it, and they may still get a crop out of it. But usually, it's non-farmer landowners that would seek the opportunity to remove heavily wooded areas, whether or not they're by waterways or not, just so that they can prepare it for a subdivision development submission later.
Mr. Chair, I think that's probably fair. I imagine that happens, yes.
Yeah, and then, of course, we know farmers that remove wooded areas for legitimate reasons.
Yes.
I've seen it many times here in Corcoran. They remove it, and it turns into agricultural plowable field.
Yep.
So, and as long as that's permitted to do, again, I first voted last time to extend this because I clearly saw this maybe as just one way for the city to kind of slow down the onslaught of removal at purely a landowner's discrimination. Again, Landowners aren't farmers, but they'll take that opportunity because they say they can, because it's farmland. But I don't know that that's realistic. As I read this here, you know, currently, this is a question of city policy and values that requires a larger discussion with city council while including a broader lens to understand the implications within the city's guiding documents. I think to try to change or put anything in there to curb that activity kind of borders in along a tree preservation plan, which I'm sure any landowner probably would find not to their liking, you know, to say that, well, I can't cut down these trees pre-development. I think, so I've had a lot of time now, a month, to think about this, and I just don't see any way around it. I don't know how we're going to get past it unless the city council, you know, wants to make an issue of it in the future. As purely a ordinance update, which this was, you know, originally brought to us, I read a little bit more into it, but I have no objection to it anymore as it is, because I think I was looking for something there that isn't, and there's nothing we can do about it. So, thank you, Mike, I appreciate it.
You're welcome, thank you.
On that note, I'll make a motion to recommend approval.
Well, Mr. Shulak, do you have any questions?
Unless you have discussion.
No, sir, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay. Would you like to state your motion?
I'll just make a motion to recommend approval of the update.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, recommendations 5-0. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff. I know a lot of time went into all of this. And thank you again, Mike, for answering those questions.
Thank you.
And the visuals were really helpful. We were discussing earlier how sometimes it was just so much to try to decipher as someone who doesn't deal with it regularly. So from a citizen or resident perspective, that was helpful.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yes. Chair and Commissioners, I think that's what we're also trying to do, is try to simplify this for resident, homeowner. You know, engineer, when it goes to a SWIP, is a different animal, but trying to just.
Well, and that's a good goal. I think what Commissioner Drummond was, it was that we got all these pages of all this change, and, you know, you might get it 7 days in advance of the meeting from our friendly law enforcement delivery service, but, you know, I might not pick it up until 3 days beforehand, and then you got to try to digest all this stuff, and but thanks, everybody, for granting us that extra opportunity to look it over.
And the garden exemption, I mean, for me, that was, I mean, we'd had a big topic on that having
Yep.
that in there was nice.
Yep. I'm still getting feedback. You guys hear
Yeah,
that?
your mic is.
Yeah, I apologize, I don't know how to
no
make
problem.
it stop.
Okay, we'll move on to item 8A, planning project update. I have one question. Wasn't Tavara supposed to have a lighted intersection down there?
At 116 in
Yeah.
Lewiston?
Yeah, wasn't that supposed to be a lighted intersection?
Lights are up as far as street lights, but no signals are up yet.
Okay,
Oh, you mean
let
traffic
me
signal.
read.
Places.
Wasn't that supposed to be a signaled intersection?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I was like, I drove by tonight, there's lights up. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
A traffic signal, we did put in the development contract that we would, that if the county found that warrants were met, they would be responsible for installing that signal. And I'm not sure the status. Our design has the turn lanes, but I don't think the county has authorized that. So the county has to authorize the signal, but it is planned for. I don't believe it's installed as part of this today.
And if the county requires it, does the county pay for it?
We have collected money from Ravinia for the signal cost, for their half of the signal cost at that intersection, and have in our development agreement for Tavera to pay the other half, should the county install that signal.
So
the
the county,
developer-
the county would pay half, not the city, it's not our road.
No, the developer would pay the cost if the county decides that the signal is warranted. It would come through us, because we've collected the money from the developer, and then we would pay the county as a pass-through. Does that,
Okay.
Otherwise, we
But,
keep the money.
You're
but
looking
how much,
confused, huh?
I mean, isn't that a lot of money that Tavara is wrapped up, or Lennar is wrapped up into a light that may or may not get built?
yep,
And how long, is there a timeline and when the county can decide? I mean, is that,
we'll have to check and get back to you on.
you don't have
that,
to, is that just how the program works? They're gonna
Yeah.
put hundreds of thousands of dollars into an account, and they may not ever see it again. I mean, what if the county doesn't do it for 20 years?
I think that's an excellent question.
That just doesn't seem right. It's a county road. If you don't require it now, I guess I don't understand, but, they got done with it, and I'm like, where are the streetlights? I thought that there were supposed to be traffic lights here. And I'm like, well, now who's gonna pay for that? Or when are they coming?
Yeah, I think I think to your point, it would make sense, I would think, to a reasonable person that if the project's done and the signal's not ready to be done, that maybe the developer shouldn't have to give up that money. But for Ravinia, we've collected the money, and we've got it in our development contract for Tavara. I forget the dollar amounts, but I feel like it's $150,000 from each side of the road.
Yeah, wow, that's crazy. Okay, well, thank you for answering that. Anybody else?
Is there any feedback or on the Northeast District Design meeting with the community members, or are you guys still digesting what was received?
Yes, so we did present that to the council last week, so if you did not look at the council packet.
Okay.
We shared the results of the survey. There was an online survey. I believe we received 166 comments. I know Commissioner Brumman was at the open house, and that had over 100 people. Commissioner, or Chair, you've been at a lot of open houses in Corcoran. I don't think we've had an open house ever as well attended as that. It was phenomenal attendance. And so the results of that are in that, is it January 27th packet?
Okay.
So I encourage you to look at that. We did, at that meeting, also ask the council, it was not in our budget, this is a grant from Hennepin County with a fixed fee budget. We did ask them to add a meeting to the Planning Commission, so we intend to bring a draft to the Planning Commission in April before your public hearing in May. But I'll also remind you, we will have another meeting before this happens, but there's an open house on March 15th planned to present a draft of the Northeast District Plan. But great turnout, and encourage your friends and neighbors to attend the open house on the 15th and the public hearing here on May, whatever that date is.
Yeah, the first Thursday in May.
And change the calendar behind the chair.
Yeah, the packet that was handed out, and I know Commissioner Lanterman, you were the liaison. It had information, it had results of the survey, and some of the questions that the planning department needs is, what kind of recommended uses do we want to see inside the business corridor, commercial corridor, and things like that. And so I've put some thought into that already, but I got a copy of it. It's good reading, but as you look at it, I think there's some questions about streets and certainly of uses and setbacks and things like that that we'll take. And so I'm highly supportive of your recommendation for a planning commission workshop a month in advance of our public hearing, so that we have had plenty of time for eyes and discussion on it before we get to a public hearing. Because with the kind of turnout that's been received so far, I would expect it'll be full. It'll be a big meeting for us, so. Yes, sir.
I have a question for staff. At one of our recent meetings, I had asked a representative of Lennar to confirm that Lennar had paid a $13.2 million payment to the United States government to settle violations of the Federal False Claims Act. I was told that Lennar would get back to me right away, and I'm still waiting. So I'm wondering if anyone left a message for me.
I have not heard anything back on that from Lennar.
And I'm not surprised. Could someone follow up or maybe give me his phone number? Because I would like either confirmation or denial.
Well, I mean, the application form is public information, so we can certainly, Natalie could send over the application form from that person.
Well, I would like the name of the person who was at the meeting.
That's the
who
person
said-
that signed the
okay.
application form.
Okay,
Would that be Paul?
Paul.
okay, thank you.
I think he works out of their, don't they have their primary offices in Eden Prairie?
It used to be Plymouth, I don't recall, but it's on the application form, so we'll know. We'll double check that and we can send that.
I have one more question. I know not too long ago, a similar Lennar project was denied in Victoria. I had asked Lennar if they could explain to me why they were denied. Haven't heard back from them. And do we know why that project was denied?
I'm not familiar with that project. I do know that Lennar has been reaching out to the mayor and trying to work through some issues. I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if you have anything to add, but I'm not familiar with that particular project myself.
Okay.
I'm not either, but I can try to do some digging and see if I,
Did they reach out to you?
not on that, no.
Oh, but they reached out to you on something?
Yeah, we've just been kind of working through a couple issues ahead of what's on the agenda next, I want to say next meeting, for Tavera, with PUD amendment request, but nothing on the other items or your other item.
Okay. I'm just curious. I mean, if, you know, they call you back, they can call, I have a phone.
Yep.
All right, thanks. But I'm not surprised. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the planning update? Okay, moving on to 8B, City Council Report. Council Member Variance.
I'm back, guys.
Welcome.
It's great to see Jay. Welcome. I've seen you before. I've met you a long time ago, but I can't remember when. You guys are doing a great job. My first meeting back, you guys are reading a lot, and I think that's great on all of the information that you get in front of you. A big thing I want to highlight is we are spending a significant amount of time related to water tower, water treatment, those kind of things. We had a really good meeting, this last meeting, work session, talking about those things, so that's kind of one of our focuses. But I think, I'm excited to have that joint work session. I believe it's February 24th with us and you, to talk about things, to get things going. I think that's something that has been absent from the council, the mayor and such, and both parks and planning. Just a little bit more cohesiveness, I think, has been needed, and obviously, I think significant focus on a number of ordinances that need to be updated. To watch staff struggle like we've done related to St. Terese and stuff on the landscape ordinances, those kind of things. Again, I think it's the first time I've ever heard it said, and Kendra said it, we might need to revisit that ordinance. And I think it's staring us in the face, along with a number of different ordinances. We are growing up, we are a growing community, and we have to grow responsibly. And I think we've got some really good folks on all of our commissions. I think council and the mayor all have the same ideas and thoughts, and very little self-agendas amongst any of us. I think we want to build a really nice community. I think it's a great community now, but I think we want to do things even better if we can. We've got some great staff. That's all I'll say about that, but I do look forward to that first joint meeting. I'm excited. We've got a couple of park spots open that we need to do some interviewing. And then I think there's something about a city administrator that we're working on to get that wrapped up by, I believe, the middle of April, I think, with the involvement of current staff and their participation in that procedure and such, and then the council and the mayor doing those things. I'm excited to have that position because I think it's extremely important to all of us. We need that. I think staff is doing a great job while we have this vacancy and stuff. But I want to take the next step, and I know what you guys all do, the mayor, other council members. We really want to do this right. We've had some interesting things come up, a fence issue, and that ordinance needs to be looked at. I don't know how much more it can be refined and stuff, but it's nice to see people asking us questions. It'd be nice to turn it around, and instead of it's go fight City Hall, it's I'm going to go talk to them and see if they can help us. I've seen that it's opened up over the past few months and stuff, but I'd really like to see that more. I have a lot of discussions with a lot of community citizens and such, and well, the mayor doesn't want this, council doesn't want this. I'm on the council, and the mayor is opening the list along with the council, and I think you guys are very, very good at listening. Again, there's times where Kendra or whoever tells us, you know, we can't say no. I think I challenged that a long time ago. I was on the planning commission and found a way to say no. So it's cool to see the evolution over the last few years happen. So if you guys have any specific questions for me, and Mark, you've asked too many, so you don't get to ask. Just kidding. I'll do my best to field it or get back to you. And I will get back to you, unlike some people.
Well, my only question is February 24th. What?
Did I spring that on you? I'm sorry.
I'm already on the there, so I'm good to go.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I actually just heard from our interim city administrator today, Jessica Bizey. She had said that they have to formally call the meeting, which will happen on Thursday.
I apologize for that.
But she's going to be sending out a save the date. But so yeah, February 24th at 5:30. There's going to be that joint session with, and it's when I hear joint session, I think of two. So, but there's actually going to be three. It's going to be you, Parks and Trails, and Council. So be on the lookout for the save the date from Jessica. And that's probably going to, I think she's going to send that tonight or tomorrow. And then it'll be formally called at the next meeting on 2/10.
And the 24th is the joint session?
Yep.
And that's to discuss what?
So that's to discuss priorities for 2022. It's an FYI and chance for discussion. We must need a new calendar. It's the last Thursday, so it's like in 3 weeks, the last Thursday of this month.
Last Thursday. I will not, I will be out of town, so I won't be able to make that. But I got to sit in on the goal setting thing. With that, down here, January 27th, for those that got to see, there was an ordinance amendment request from a resident who built a fence and was found to be in violation of the fence ordinance as it related to height. And then there was questions about what constitutes a front yard and a backyard. And that was added to the list of priorities for zoning ordinance
Talking
amendments
about it
this year.
and such, yeah. And again, I think council and the mayor, we wanted to help them, but after the meeting, my opinion, I think we know what the backyard is, we know what the side yard is.
Well,
And such, and we want to help, but the procedures already began, or the process has already began, and going to court and those kind of things. I think we told them to ask for an extension and such, and we'll still try to help, but I don't know how much we'll be able to help.
well, I mean, with all due respect, after listening to that whole ordeal, I didn't find anybody that could give an explanation of what constitutes a backyard.
Right. Especially on that corner lot.
And, in his defense, I'm like, that fence seems perfectly legit for him to back off his back, fence off. I mean, a homeowner should be entitled to the right to build a fence for privacy in his backyard. Now, how you determine what constitutes the backyard, it seems like you could geometrically do it based upon the positioning of the house,
You got like a front door, but then you've got his addresses on the driveway side and stuff like that. I mean, it's something that we ask staff to look at and such, but I don't know how far staff can make a change and stuff. So,
It'll be something that I look into. I think we're just trying to figure out the timeline, and in the meantime, we've told them to request a continuance from the court, and.
I understand the court issue and the need for continuance and stuff, but I didn't hear a lot of concrete discussion about what constitutes his backyard.
He really doesn't have a backyard. He has two frontages and a side yard.
Mr. Chair, this is an active litigation. We probably shouldn't be discussing this.
Yeah, I'm just saying, as it goes to the ordinance amendment, we should, maybe we should look at some examples to help us define, when we get to that point, but I digress. Can I ask who Phil Kern is?
He's the city administrator, I believe, at Delano, and he's who we hired to help facilitate the goal setting.
Okay, I just, I've never heard of it, and I just was like, is he, I didn't think he was part of.
he does that for a lot of cities.
Yep.
He's a facilitator for goal setting and such. It's one of those things he loves to do.
Okay.
So he's got a great city over in Delano, and he helped us significantly.
I also, at that last meeting, watched the presentation by Senator Osmek. Listen, I have no idea what it's like to be a senator, but I was surprised that he hadn't heard of the Affordable Housing Act.
Yeah.
That kind of, and.
It was a concern on our part too, and I think we've got the point across for the city of Corcoran that attention needs to be paid and follow-up needs to be done, so.
Well, I was talking to my friend today who was on the city council for Maple Plain, and he hadn't heard about it at all. And I said, well, our mayor sent me an email, I'll forward it to you, so you can kind of get, but, if you've ever had a chance to read that. Commissioner Lanterman, I don't know what you thought of the summary You know, I think it came through the city, or the Minnesota League of Cities.
Yeah, some of it did, and some of it's.
I mean, it is the most mumble-jumbled bunch of language I've ever seen, and I was like, I think you'd have to almost diagram out, you know, some of the paragraphs explaining what this act will do. But anyway.
Sorry, is there something you're concerned about for us as a city or with that, or?
Well, it'll basically pretty much take a lot of the zoning powers